Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. The discourse, the discussion surrounding who will be the next Ohio State defensive coordinator heading into the 2025 year, it's only become more heated over the last 24 hours. When Jim Knowles left on Sunday, I think a lot of Ohio State fans, one, we're just pissed off Jim Knowles left, but I think secondly, we're just, kind of throwing out some names. And that's normally what happens during the first 24 hours. And then the next 24 hours, you start to get a better feel of, all right, what direction might Ohio State be going in? The reporters that followed this program start putting out some names. Then the debates start happening. And Matt Guerrieri seems to be the most popular name you see from the Ohio State reporters and seems to be the most popular and controversial name amongst the Ohio State fans as well. Want to get into Matt Guerrieri a little bit. I also want to have a conversation of who are the guys that you call right away and the guys that, hey, maybe they won't take the job, but, names that you probably have to at least pick up the phone and call. And one of the things that makes this defensive coordinator search so exciting for Ohio State fans, I think, is that, look, when you're talking about the defending national champs, when you're talking about the Ohio State Buckeyes, they ain't many names off the table. Ryan Day can pick up the phone and get an answer from just about anybody in the country. And so there are a lot of names that could be potential good hires for Ohio State. Want to focus on Matt Guerrieri, talk about a few names that we didn't talk about on Sunday afternoon. Before we get into it, as always, the Ohio State fans, it was really fun Sunday, just throwing out a bunch of names. It was really fun hearing from you guys in the comments section. A lot of different really good names y'all brought up. Let it fly again in the comments section. I had a blast talking ball with you guys on Sunday afternoon. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, let's start with Matt Guerrieri, who seems to be the most popular name when you talk about defensive coordinator candidates. I want to start with the pros, and I want to make it very clear that I am not a at all cost hire from within. I'm not at all costs hey, just focus on continuity, especially when you're a program like Ohio State and you have the capability to go out and attract some really good defensive coordinators from outside of the program. But in this case, I do think there are some things that make Matt Guerrieri really intriguing for Ohio State. I think most notably that continuity aspect. And why I'm focused so much on the continuity thing is, look, we knew that there'd be some growing pains with the Jim Knowles defense. He's a very complicated defensive coordinator. He's going to give a lot of different personnel groupings. He's going to give a lot of different blitz packages, a lot of different coverage packages between the ears mentally. He's going to put a lot on his players' plate. And you saw the first couple of years, it was not bad, but it probably wasn't maximized quite yet. What you saw in 2024, especially in the back half of the season, especially what you saw in the college football playoffs, at least from an outsider looking in at that program, something seemed to click in terms of how this Ohio State defense was playing. Not only did they feel really comfortable in the scheme, it was clearly working, but it was very clear that the players were thinking a little bit less and just going out there and playing. And when you have the ability to run a complicated defense, but also have your very, very talented defenders playing like they understand the scheme, that's that blend that you love. We're being complicated. We're putting a lot on opposing offensive linemen and opposing quarterbacks, but we're also allowing our players to play fast and play physical. That's a hard line to walk. That playoff run and really just the back half of the 2024 season, to me, from an outsider, it looked like Ohio State, it was clicking. And so you look at the continuity piece and say, Matt Guerrieri's been with Coach Knowles. He's obviously very familiar with what Ohio State was doing on defense. It was very clearly working. For this example, continuity might play a little bit more of an important role in terms of what we're trying to do. I think secondly, and this to me matters, Ryan Day knows him, and Ryan Day clearly likes him. And when you have the ability to go out and make a hire where you're not blind, hey, there's a lot of really good defensive coordinators out there that, hey, their track record of coaching and calling defenses are very, very good, but you're not really sure how they're going to come into a new program and gel with the other coaches. That sometimes is a problem. You see really good defensive coordinators at one program come to another program, and it just doesn't work out because, maybe just something doesn't click. the idea of Ryan Day, knowing him, the idea of the players knowing McGarry. And look, if Ryan Day is confident in McGarry because he knows him well, that's another thing that makes you feel a little bit more confident in terms of a hire like McGarry. Now, there are also some, I don't know if you'd say cons, but you'd probably say question marks around McGarry as well. And you probably start with just he's green. He's 35 years old. He is taking over one of the biggest programs across the country. And it's a big job for a young guy that doesn't have a laundry list of a track record of actually calling the defense. That's probably where it starts. And I think secondly, and this was a point that was brought up by some Ohio State fans, and I'm not really sure what the dynamic looks like, but what does this mean for a guy like Tim Walton, where you have some guys who are a little bit more senior than McGarry, who are doing a really good job on this Ohio State staff that might get passed over for McGarry to get elevated. A guy like Tim Walton is the first one that comes to mind. What does that mean for Tim Walton? How does that make Tim Walton feel? Now, a lot of Ohio State fans say, hey, Tim Walton's really happy with what he's doing, and that might be the case. And Ryan Day probably has to have that conversation with Tim Walton as well. That transparent conversation of, hey, if we go out and elevate McGarry, how do you feel about it? That's probably something that needs to take place. We don't really know what that dynamic looks like, but it is certainly a dynamic that is worth bringing up. The way I look at it is that if Ryan Day, who knows McGarry very, very well in terms of how he coaches players, the relationships he's built with the players, if Ryan Day wants to make that move, if I'm an Ohio State fan, I feel pretty good about it. You have some Ohio State fans saying elevate McGarry just because you keep Caleb Downs. You don't make a defensive coordinator as good as Caleb Downs is, best safety in the country, one of the most impactful defenders that you see in the country. You don't make a defensive coordinator hire just for a guy like Caleb Downs who will be going to the NFL draft after year 3. That's probably my personal take on that. To me, McGarry would make a lot of sense. And I think finally, this guy's a rising star. It is very clear that there are a lot of coaches across the country that like McGarry a lot. And you even hear in some reports that he was a candidate for some other DC jobs across the country as well. If Ryan Day feels comfortable making this hire, and I think it's worth noting, Ryan Day's track record in terms of hiring coordinators has been pretty damn good as of late. I think if you're an Ohio State fan, you feel pretty good about it. Now, who are the names that you probably have to call immediately before you give the job to McGarry? It starts with Jeff Hafley. I mean, you look at Jeff Hafley, what he's done. He's a sitting defensive coordinator in the NFL. This probably has a little bit more to do with Jeff Hafley than anything else. Does Jeff Hafley want to be another head coach at the collegiate ranks, or is he happy in the NFL? That's probably the conversation, because if he wants to become a head coach at the collegiate ranks once again, coming to Ohio State for a couple of years, doing a really good job, you probably get a better job than you had at Boston College, because he showed he's a good head coach at Boston College. He did not get fired from Boston College. He just left because I think he felt like, hey, I'm not really sure how much higher we can take this program. If he wants to get a bigger job with a higher ceiling, Jeff Hafley might be interested in coming back to Ohio State, being a really good defensive coordinator for a couple of years, and then probably gets a bigger Power 4 job coming out of it. That's probably the name that it has to be there has to be a call made to Jeff Hafley before you just elevate a guy like McGarry. I think another name is Jim Leonhard. And again, he's been very vocal, and it sounds like he's been offered some, or at least been in defensive coordinator discussions, wants to stay in the NFL as of right now. Again, kind of like what we talked about Sunday. Has he had Ohio State offer him? Because that's kind of a little bit of a different ball game when you're talking about, hey, I don't know if I want to go back to college. Well, if Ohio State wants me, that might change that dynamic and thought process a little bit. One thing I love about Jim Leonhard is not only do we have a strong sample size of him being a really, really good DC at Wisconsin, love guys coming back down from the NFL. That's been a sneaky track record and something that Ohio State might want to think about in this coordinator hire search. You look at Danton Lynn and what he did at UCLA and what he's doing at USC. You look at some of the Michigan DCs, Jesse Minter, Mike McDonald, and now Wink Martindale. It's a small sample size, but there's a sample size of NFL guys. Steve Belichick at Washington, probably another good example, that come down from the NFL to college, on the defensive side of the football have a lot of success. If you're Ryan Day and you're looking at that trend saying, hey, maybe we want to go up to the NFL ranks and go find our next defensive coordinator, Jim Leonhard would be that guy. He's obviously spending time with the Denver Broncos right now. One name that I've seen thrown out a bunch that I just don't like, and again, it's just respectful disagreement between us. Bo Pelini, obviously Youngstown, Ohio guy, Ohio State alum. You like those things for sure. He hasn't coached since 2020. The last time he was a defensive coordinator was a disaster at LSU. And I think finally there are just some coaches that it seems like the sports kind of passed them by, and they probably haven't adapted to the new way of coaching and the new way of the landscape. Bo Pelini, to me, is probably one of those guys. One, he hasn't even been in college since 2020, and we all know how different the sport is now than it was 5 years ago. And I think secondly, it just, for lack of better terms, Bo Pelini feels a little bit washed up in terms of what he is as a football coach. I mean, you're going to go out and get a guy that was canned from LSU in 2020, has not been defensive coordinator since that year. To me, I don't know if that makes a ton of sense. And so I think there are a lot of really good options Ohio State can go after. I think Bo Pelini is a risk and a little bit of a settle that I don't think makes sense for Ohio State. A lot of good candidates. Matt Guerrieri seems to be that guy. That's the most popular name to talk about. We'll see how it works out. I think we'll get a pretty good sense of where Ohio State is deciding to go with this in terms of how quick this hiring process is. You know, if it's quick, probably going to mean it's going to be a guy like Matt Guerrieri. If it takes a little bit longer, you're probably going outside of the Ohio State program. A lot of good options. I think this one is kind of hard not to get right. And at the end of the day, we say this all the time. College football, it's coordinators matter. There's no secret about that. It's about the Jimmies and Joes. And we know Ohio State will have that. We'll have that checked in a big way. We'll get out of here on that. I'm a fan of Matt Guerrieri. I know some Ohio State fans might call me an idiot. Let's have it in the comment section. Let's talk some ball. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later.